The morning sun cast long shadows across Highway 47 as Elissa Thompson adjusted her rearview mirror and checked her watch. 7:45 a.m., right on schedule. After 32 years as an air traffic controller at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, punctuality wasn't just a habit. It was embedded in her DNA like a permanent instruction manual. Now, at 61, she drove Route 12 for the Millfield County Transit Authority. Same precision, different vehicle. Her passengers were mostly factory workers heading to their early shifts, a few students bound for the community college, and the occasional elderly resident with a doctor's appointment in the next town over. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," called Jake Morrison, a young man in his 20s who worked at the automotive parts plant. He climbed aboard with his usual cheerful energy, hard hat tucked under his arm, and lunch pail in hand. "Good morning, Jake. How's your mother doing after her surgery?" Elissa asked, pulling away from the stop with smooth precision. "Much better. Thanks for asking. She should be back on her feet next week." This was what Elissa loved about her new life. In the control tower, she had guided thousands of aircraft safely to their destinations, but she rarely knew the people inside those metal tubes 30,000 feet above. Here, she knew Mrs. Patterson's arthritis acted up before rain, that 17-year-old Sarah was saving money for nursing school, and that old Mr. Hendricks took the bus just to have someone to talk to. The route was familiar. Past Miller's farm with its red barn and grazing cattle, through downtown Millfield with its restored Main Street, then onto the highway toward Riverside Industrial Park. Elissa had driven this path hundreds of times over the past 3 years since retirement. She knew every pothole, every traffic light timing, every merge point where impatient drivers tried to cut in. Her hands rested confidently on the steering wheel, the same hands that had once coordinated the complex ballet of aircraft arrivals and departures at one of the world's busiest airports. Those years had taught her to stay calm under pressure, to think 3 steps ahead, and to trust her training even when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. "Looks like traffic's moving well today," observed Martha Chen, a quality inspector at the electronics assembly plant. She sat in her usual spot, 3rd row on the left, and always commented on traffic patterns. "Should have you there with time to spare," Elissa replied, glancing at her passengers in the mirror. 23 people this morning, including 2 newcomers she didn't recognize yet. One was a middle-aged man in a suit who kept checking his phone anxiously. The other was a young woman with a baby carrier, looking nervous about something. As they approached the on-ramp to Highway 47, Elissa noticed dark smoke rising in the distance. Her trained eye immediately assessed the situation. Too much smoke for a car fire, too concentrated for a brush fire. Something industrial, maybe a 1/4 mile ahead near the Riverside Chemical Processing Facility. The facility had been a source of community concern for years. Built in the 1960s, it processed various chemicals for agricultural and industrial applications. While the plant maintained a good safety record, residents often worried about the potential for accidents. Environmental groups had pushed for updated safety equipment, and the company had recently invested millions in new containment systems and emergency protocols. "Is that a fire up there?" Jake asked, pointing toward the smoke column. "Looks like it might be," Elissa said, already adjusting her route mentally. "We might need to take the alternate road if—" The explosion happened without warning. The sound hit them first, a deep, rolling thunder that seemed to come from the earth itself. The bus windows rattled in their frames, and several passengers instinctively ducked. Then the shockwave arrived, a pressure change that made everyone's ears pop simultaneously. Finally, they saw the fireball rising above the tree line, orange and black and impossibly large. Elissa's hands tightened on the wheel as her training kicked in automatically. Stay calm, assess the situation, protect your aircraft. No, protect your passengers. "Everyone stay seated and keep your seat belts on," she announced in the same steady voice she had once used to guide nervous pilots through thunderstorms. "We're going to pull over and assess the situation." Behind her, passengers began murmuring with concern. Some pulled out cell phones to call family members. Others craned their necks to get a better view of the growing smoke plume. "Mrs. Thompson, should we turn around?" asked Maria Santos, a cafeteria worker at the industrial park. "Let me evaluate our options," Elissa replied, scanning the road ahead for safe areas to stop or alternate routes to take. Her years in air traffic control had taught her never to make hasty decisions during crisis situations. Gather information first, then choose the best course of action. But before she could find a safe place to stop, the secondary explosion occurred. This one was bigger, closer, and sent a shockwave that cracked windows throughout the valley. Car alarms began wailing in the distance. Birds erupted from trees in frantic clouds. Worse, the explosion sent a piece of industrial equipment, a massive steel beam from a collapsed storage facility, flying through the air like a spear thrown by an angry giant. Elissa saw it coming. Her air traffic controller's mind, trained to track multiple objects moving through three-dimensional space, calculated its trajectory in milliseconds. The beam would hit the highway approximately 200 yards ahead, right where the road curved around Miller's Pond. "Hold on," she shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right. The bus lurched toward the shoulder as the steel beam crashed into the asphalt exactly where they would have been traveling. It hit with enough force to tear a 10-foot gash in the road surface and send chunks of concrete flying in all directions. One of those chunks, roughly the size of a basketball, struck their front windshield. The safety glass spider-webbed instantly, obscuring Elissa's vision just as she was trying to navigate the bus back onto the roadway. Fighting to see through the damaged windshield, she didn't notice the drainage ditch that ran alongside this section of highway until it was too late. The right front wheel dropped into the ditch with a bone-jarring impact. Physics took over from there. The bus, traveling at 45 miles per hour, tilted violently to the right. For a moment, it balanced on two wheels like a motorcycle taking a sharp turn. Then gravity won. The world turned sideways. Elissa felt the strange sensation of falling while still sitting in her seat. Emergency lights flickered on as the electrical system tried to compensate for the unusual angle. Luggage and personal items became projectiles, flying across the passenger compartment. Someone screamed. Multiple people screamed. The bus slid down a gentle embankment and came to rest on its right side with a grinding, scraping sound that seemed to go on forever. Then silence, broken only by the hiss of escaping air from the brake system and the distant wail of sirens responding to the explosion. Elissa hung sideways in her driver's seat, held in place by her seatbelt. Her head throbbed where it had struck the side window, and her left shoulder felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. But she was conscious, alert, and most importantly, alive. The taste of copper filled her mouth. She had bitten her tongue during the impact. Her ears were ringing from the explosions and the crash. But her mind was clear, already shifting into emergency mode, processing the situation with the same systematic approach she had used during aircraft emergencies. "Sound off," she called out, using the same procedure she had learned in emergency training decades ago. "Anyone who can hear me, say your name." "Jake Morrison, I'm okay, I think." "Martha Chen, my arm hurts, but I can move." "Sarah Williams, I'm scared, but not hurt." "Bill Foster checking in, I'm all right." "Maria Santos, a little shaken up, but okay." One by one, voices called out from the overturned passenger compartment. Elissa counted them carefully, matching each voice to a face in her memory. 21 responses. That left 2 people unaccounted for. "Mr. Patterson? Mrs. Rodriguez?" she called. No response from either. Fighting through the pain in her shoulder, Elissa unbuckled her seatbelt and carefully extracted herself from the driver's seat. The bus was lying on its right side, which meant the left windows were now facing the sky. She could see blue sky and clouds through them, a surreal sight that reminded her of looking up through the glass ceiling of the airport control tower. Moving carefully across what used to be the left wall of the bus, but was now effectively the floor, she made her way toward the passenger area. The scene that greeted her was chaos, but organized chaos. People were helping each other, checking for injuries, trying to make sense of their new sideways world. "Everyone listen to me," Elissa said, projecting her voice the way she had learned to do during emergency drills. "I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly. We're going to get everyone out of here safely, but we need to do it methodically." Near the back of the bus, she found Mr. Patterson, the elderly man who rode to his dialysis appointments twice a week. He was conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where his glasses had been knocked askew. "Mr. Patterson, can you hear me?" "Yes, dear." "What happened? My head feels fuzzy." "There was an explosion at the plant and we had an accident. You have a small cut on your forehead, but you're going to be fine. Can you move your arms and legs?" He tested each limb carefully, wincing slightly as he moved his left arm. "Everything seems to work, though my shoulder is sore. That's normal after an impact like this. Just stay still for now. We're going to get you out in just a minute." Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s who cleaned offices at the industrial park, was found near the middle of the bus. She was unconscious, but breathing steadily. Elissa knelt beside her and checked for obvious injuries using the basic first aid training she had received during her years at the airport. No broken bones that she could detect, no excessive bleeding. Her pulse was strong and regular, likely a concussion from the impact when the bus overturned. Her breathing was steady, which was encouraging, but head injuries could be unpredictable. "Jake, I need you to come here," Elissa called. The young man made his way over carefully, stepping around scattered belongings and broken glass. "What can I do?" "I need you to stay with Mrs. Rodriguez. Talk to her. Try to keep her responsive if she wakes up, but don't move her unless there's immediate danger. Monitor her breathing and let me know if anything changes. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "What should I say to her?" "Just normal conversation. Tell her who you are, where we are, that help is coming. If she wakes up confused, that's normal with a head injury. Keep her calm and still." Elissa moved through the overturned bus like a general surveying a battlefield. Her 32 years of managing crisis situations in the air traffic control tower had taught her to compartmentalize, to focus on immediate problems while keeping track of larger patterns and potential future complications. The immediate problems were clear: 2 injured passengers, 1 possibly serious, 21 others with various cuts and bruises but mobile. A bus lying on its side with the engine still running, which could potentially cause a fire. Unknown conditions outside the vehicle. The larger patterns were also becoming clear. The explosion at the chemical plant meant emergency responders would be overwhelmed dealing with that crisis. Help might be delayed. They were in a ditch beside a highway, not easily visible to passing traffic. They would need to be self-sufficient for a while. "Martha, you said your arm hurts. Let me take a look." Martha Chen extended her left arm gingerly. Elissa examined it with the careful attention she had learned during mandatory first aid training at the airport. The arm was swollen around the wrist, and Martha couldn't rotate it without pain. "I think it's sprained, not broken," she concluded. "We'll make a sling for it once we get outside." "How's your head? Any dizziness or nausea?" "No, I feel okay otherwise. Just the arm." "Good. I'm going to put you in charge of checking everyone else for injuries. Nothing major, just cuts that need bandaging or bruises that might indicate something more serious." Look for signs of confusion or disorientation that could indicate concussion. Can you handle that? Yes, I can do that. This was how Elissa had always worked. Delegate responsibilities to capable people, maintain clear communication, and keep everyone focused on specific tasks. In the control tower, she had coordinated teams of controllers, ground crew, pilots, and weather specialists during complex emergency situations. A bus accident was smaller in scale, but required the same fundamental approach. Sarah, I need you to collect all the cell phones that still work and see if any of them have signal. We need to call for help. My phone is cracked, but it still turns on, the teenage girl replied. I'll check the others. Anyone with medical training speak up now, Elissa called out. A voice from near the front responded, I'm a retired Army medic. Name's Bill Foster. Elissa remembered him now. He rode the bus twice a week to his part-time job at the hardware store. Quiet man, always polite, never talked much about his military service. Bill, I need you to take charge of Mrs. Rodriguez. Check her pupils, monitor her breathing. Standard concussion protocol. What's your assessment? Bill moved carefully to where the unconscious woman lay and began a systematic examination. Pupils are equal and reactive. Breathing is steady and unlabored. Pulse is strong. No obvious signs of spinal injury. But we should treat her as if there might be. Classic concussion presentation. Prognosis? Should be fine if we can get her to a hospital for proper evaluation. Head injuries are unpredictable, but she's stable for now. The familiarity of emergency procedures was oddly comforting. Elissa had spent decades preparing for situations that, thankfully, rarely occurred. But when they did occur, training took over. The difference between a successful emergency response and a disaster often came down to the first few minutes. How quickly leadership emerged, how effectively resources were organized, how calm everyone stayed under pressure. Okay, everyone, she announced. We're going to evacuate through the left windows, which are now facing up. Before we do that, I need to turn off the engine and check for any gas leaks or fire hazards. Making her way back to the driver's area, Elissa carefully turned off the ignition and engaged the parking brake, even though the bus wasn't going anywhere. She checked the fuel gauge, 3/4 full, which meant a lot of diesel fuel in the tank. No smell of gasoline, no visible leaks. But they needed to get away from the vehicle as soon as possible. She also noticed that the radio was still functional. She grabbed the microphone and tried to contact dispatch. Millfield Transit, this is Unit 12. Do you copy? Static filled the air, then a crackling voice. Unit 12, this is dispatch. We've been trying to reach you. Are you okay? Dispatch, we've had an accident. Bus is overturned near mile marker 23 on Highway 47. 23 passengers, 2 injuries, 1 potentially serious. We need medical assistance. Copy that, Unit 12. We're aware of the situation at the chemical plant. Emergency services are overwhelmed right now, but we're sending help your way. ETA unknown due to road conditions and ongoing emergency response. Understood, dispatch. We're evacuating passengers now and establishing a safe area away from the vehicle. Do you need further assistance, Unit 12? Negative for now. We're handling the situation. We'll update as conditions change. The evacuation itself proved challenging. The windows that now faced the sky were about 8 feet above the new floor of the overturned bus. They would need to form a human ladder to get people out, starting with the most mobile and working their way toward the injured. Jake, you're young and strong. I need you to go first, then help pull others up. Bill, you go second so you can receive Mrs. Rodriguez when we lift her up. Sarah, you're third. One by one, they formed an efficient evacuation chain. Jake boosted himself up through a window frame, carefully avoiding the broken glass, then reached down to help others. The process was slow but methodical. No one panicked. No one complained about minor injuries or discomfort. "Take your time," Elissa coached each person as they climbed out. "No rushing. We'd rather do this safely than quickly." Within 20 minutes, everyone was out of the bus except Elissa, Mrs. Rodriguez, and Bill Foster. "How is she?" Elissa asked. "Elissa, stable. Definitely a concussion, but pupils are reactive and breathing is strong. She's shown some signs of regaining consciousness, mumbling a little, moving her fingers. We need to be very careful moving her." "Agreed. We'll use the aisle seats as a stretcher. Can you help me remove them?" The bus seats were designed to be removable for cleaning and maintenance. Working together, they freed 2 aisle seats and positioned them to create a makeshift stretcher. Moving Mrs. Rodriguez onto it required careful coordination, supporting her head and neck while maintaining spinal alignment. "Slow and steady," Bill coached as they positioned her. "Keep her head straight. That's it." Getting her through the window opening was the most challenging part. The other passengers formed a receiving line outside while Jake and another man reached down into the bus to guide the improvised stretcher up and out. "Easy now," Elissa called out. "Support her head. Don't let her slide." Finally, Elissa climbed out herself, leaving the overturned bus empty. The view from ground level was sobering. The chemical plant explosion had created a mushroom cloud visible for miles. Emergency vehicles were racing back and forth on the distant highway, but none had reached their location yet. They were truly on their own for the immediate future. The air carried the acrid smell of burning chemicals and rubber. In the distance, they could hear the constant wail of sirens, the occasional rumble of heavy emergency vehicles, and what sounded like helicopters circling the plant site. "Everyone gather around," Elissa called. "We need to set up a safe area away from the bus and wait for help to arrive." They chose a spot about 50 yards from the overturned vehicle, near a cluster of oak trees that provided some shade and shelter. The location offered clear sightlines to the highway above, making them more visible to potential rescuers, while keeping them at a safe distance from the bus in case of fire or explosion. Elissa organized them into a defensive perimeter of sorts, not against attackers, but against the various hazards of their situation. Mrs. Rodriguez was placed in the center, with Bill Foster monitoring her condition constantly. Martha Chen, despite her injured arm, took charge of treating minor cuts and scrapes using a first aid kit they had retrieved from the bus. "We need to take inventory," Elissa announced. "Everyone empty your pockets and bags. Let's see what resources we have." The inventory revealed 3 working cell phones, a first aid kit, 2 bottles of water, various snacks and lunches, a small toolbox from the bus, several jackets and sweaters, Martha's compact mirror, and a surprising array of useful small items that people carry for their daily routines. Sarah Williams became the communications coordinator, checking periodically for cell phone signal and trying different carriers. "Still no signal," Sarah reported. "The explosion must have taken out the nearest cell tower." "That's okay," Elissa replied. "Someone will notice the bus eventually, and emergency responders will work their way out here once they handle the main crisis." But privately, she was concerned. Mrs. Rodriguez needed medical attention soon. The concussion appeared stable, but head injuries could deteriorate rapidly, and they had no way to signal for help or communicate their location to rescue teams. That's when Jake Morrison had an idea. "Mrs. Thompson, you used to work at the airport, right? Do you know anything about signaling aircraft?" Elissa paused in her inventory of their supplies. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, there are planes flying over periodically, probably rerouted around the explosion site. Could we signal them somehow?" It was a good thought, but problematic. "Commercial aircraft fly too high to see us clearly, and even if they did, they can't land to help. But," she looked around at their situation with new eyes, "but you might be onto something." She remembered that the emergency responders would eventually include helicopter units, medical helicopters, news helicopters, possibly military helicopters if the plant explosion was severe enough. Those flew low enough to spot ground signals. Everyone who has something reflective, mirrors, smartphones, anything shiny, gather it here. We're going to create a signal mirror. Using broken pieces of glass from the bus windows, smartphone screens, and Martha Chen's compact mirror, they assembled a collection of reflective surfaces. Elissa arranged them in a pattern designed to catch and reflect sunlight upward. "This won't help us immediately," she explained, "but when helicopters start flying over the area, they might spot the reflection." Meanwhile, Bill Foster reported that Mrs. Rodriguez was showing signs of regaining consciousness. "Maria, can you hear me?" he said gently. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening. "What? Where am I?" "You're safe," Elissa said, kneeling beside her. "We had an accident, but everyone is okay. You hit your head, so we need you to stay very still." "The bus, I remember noise and then falling." "That's right. Do you remember your name?" "Maria Rodriguez. I work at Patterson Industries." Her voice was weak but clear. "Good. What day is it?" Maria thought for a moment. "Tuesday? Close. It's Wednesday. But that's normal with a head injury. The important thing is that you're conscious and talking. How do you feel?" "My head hurts, and I'm dizzy." "That's expected. Just rest and let us take care of everything." Over the next hour, their situation gradually improved. Sarah finally found a weak cell phone signal and managed to send a text message to 911 with their approximate location. The signal wasn't strong enough for voice calls, but at least someone now knew they were here. Mr. Patterson, despite being 78 years old, proved remarkably resilient. The cut on his forehead had stopped bleeding, and he insisted on helping organize their supplies and equipment. "I was in Korea," he told Elissa quietly. "Different kind of emergency, but you learned to adapt." "How did you know I was former military?" she asked. "I didn't. But you move like someone who's been in command during crisis situations?" "Army?" "Air Force, actually. But civilian, air traffic control." He nodded approvingly. "Same principles apply. Stay calm, make decisions, take care of your people." "What was your unit in Korea?" "1st Cavalry Division. We spent a lot of time in difficult situations with limited resources. You learn to work with what you have and trust your people." As they talked, Elissa realized that several of her passengers had experience that could be valuable in their current situation. Bill Foster's medical training was obvious, but others had skills that might help. "Does anyone have camping or outdoor experience?" she asked the group. A quiet woman named Linda Harris raised her hand. "I volunteer with the county search and rescue team on weekends. Not medical, but wilderness survival and emergency shelter." "Perfect. Linda, could you help us improve our setup here? Make sure we're positioned for maximum visibility and safety?" "Absolutely." Linda quickly assessed their position and made several suggestions. They moved slightly to take advantage of a natural windbreak, arranged their supplies more efficiently, and created clear sight lines to multiple directions for spotting potential rescuers. Around noon, they heard the first helicopter. It was flying a search pattern in the distance, probably looking for casualties from the plant explosion. Elissa quickly organized her makeshift signal mirror system, directing several people to aim the reflective surfaces toward the aircraft. "Short flashes, not continuous," she instructed. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, pause. That's the international distress signal. They repeated the pattern for several minutes, but the helicopter continued its search pattern without apparent recognition of their signals. "Don't be discouraged," Elissa told the group. "They're busy with the main emergency right now. But our text message got through, so someone knows we're here." 20 minutes later, they heard sirens approaching on the highway above them. "Finally," Jake said with relief, but Elissa held up her hand for quiet. The sirens were getting closer, but they weren't stopping. She climbed partway up the embankment to get a better view of the road. An ambulance and 2 fire trucks were speeding toward the plant explosion, emergency lights flashing. They passed the location where the bus had left the roadway without slowing down. "They don't see us," she realized. The bus was lying on its side in a drainage ditch, partially hidden by tall grass and the embankment itself. From road level, it would be nearly invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. "We need to make ourselves more visible," she told the group. Working together, they gathered branches and debris to spell out "help" in letters large enough to be seen from the road. Jake and 2 other men climbed partway up the embankment and began waving whenever they heard vehicles approaching. The process was exhausting and frustrating. Several emergency vehicles passed without noticing them. But Elissa kept everyone focused and organized, rotating people through different tasks to prevent fatigue and maintain morale. "This is just like air traffic control," she explained to Sarah Williams during one of their rest breaks. "Sometimes you have to guide planes through difficult weather for hours before conditions improve enough for landing. Patience and persistence are part of the job." It took another 40 minutes, but finally a police cruiser spotted them. Officer Patricia Williams, no relation to Sarah the teenager, was the first responder to reach their location. She climbed down the embankment with practiced efficiency, radio crackling with updates about the ongoing emergency at the chemical plant. "How many injured?" she asked Elissa immediately. "One serious, concussion, stable but needs medical attention. Several minor injuries, cuts and bruises, 1 possible sprained arm, 23 total people." "Who's in charge here?" "I am, Elissa Thompson, bus driver for Millfield County Transit." Officer Williams looked around at the organized encampment they had established, the injured woman properly positioned and monitored, the minor injuries treated and bandaged, supplies organized, everyone calm and accounted for. "You've done excellent work here," she said. "How long have you been coordinating emergency response?" "This is my first bus accident," Elissa replied. "But I spent 32 years as an air traffic controller, so crisis management isn't entirely new." "That explains it. Medical units are en route, ETA about 10 minutes. True to her word, paramedics arrived within 15 minutes. They were followed by additional fire and rescue personnel, who secured the scene and began the process of safely recovering the overturned bus. Mrs. Rodriguez was carefully loaded onto a proper stretcher and transported to Riverside Regional Hospital, where a CT scan would confirm that her concussion was minor and would heal completely. Mr. Patterson was also taken to the hospital as a precaution, though he insisted he felt fine. The remaining passengers were evaluated by paramedics and released. Most had family members come to pick them up. A few, including Jake Morrison, stayed to give statements to investigators trying to determine exactly what had happened. "The explosion sent debris flying much farther than anyone expected," explained Fire Chief Robert Davis. "You're lucky Mrs. Thompson saw that steel beam coming and managed to avoid a direct hit." "What about the plant? How bad was the explosion?" "Could have been much worse. Chemical reaction got out of control in one of the processing units, but the safety systems contained most of it. No fatalities, just a few injuries among the plant workers. They'll probably be back in operation within a month once the damaged equipment is replaced." As the afternoon wore on and the immediate crisis passed, investigators began focusing on what they were calling the bus incident. The county's emergency management coordinator, Susan Palmer, arrived to conduct interviews and file reports. "Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to ask you about your response to the emergency. You seem to have handled the situation extremely well." I just did what needed to be done. But you did it very systematically. Most people would have panicked, or at least been less organized. Do you have emergency response training? Elissa explained her background in air traffic control, the decades of training for crisis situations, the procedures and protocols that had become second nature. We deal with emergencies regularly in air traffic control, she said. Not usually crashes, thankfully, but weather emergencies, mechanical failures, medical situations on board aircraft. You learn to stay calm and work the problem systematically. Palmer made notes on her tablet. The way you organized your passengers, delegated responsibilities, managed resources, it's textbook emergency coordination. Better than textbook, actually, because you adapted the principles to your specific situation. Experience teaches you that every emergency is different, but the basic approach stays the same. Assess the situation, secure your people, establish communication, work the problem step by step. Would you be interested in working with our emergency management office? We could use someone with your experience to help train other transit drivers. Maybe develop better emergency protocols. I'm retired, remember? I drive the bus because I like the people and the routine, not because I'm looking for another career. Think about it. What you did here today probably saved lives. Mrs. Rodriguez's concussion could have been much worse if she hadn't received proper care immediately, and keeping everyone calm and organized prevented panic injuries. That evening, Elissa sat in her small apartment overlooking Main Street, thinking about the day's events. The local news was covering the plant explosion, showing aerial shots of the damage and interviewing plant officials about the investigation. They mentioned the bus accident briefly. 23 people were safely evacuated from an overturned transit bus after debris from the explosion caused the vehicle to leave the roadway. All passengers were treated and released except for one woman with a minor head injury. No mention of her name, no discussion of how the evacuation was managed, no recognition of anything beyond the basic facts, which was exactly how she preferred it. But as she reflected on the day, Elissa realized that something significant had happened beyond the immediate crisis. She had discovered that the skills and experience she had developed over decades of public service were more transferable than she had ever imagined. The systematic thinking required to coordinate aircraft movements through complex airspace had translated perfectly to managing an emergency evacuation. The communication skills necessary to guide nervous pilots through dangerous weather had helped keep frightened passengers calm and organized. The ability to make quick decisions under pressure had enabled her to respond effectively to rapidly changing conditions. Her phone rang around 8 o'clock. It was Jake Morrison. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to thank you again for what you did today. I've been thinking about it all afternoon, and I realized something." "What's that?" "You saved our lives, not just by avoiding that steel beam, but by keeping us all together and organized afterward. My cousin was in a car accident last year, and 3 people panicked and made things much worse. Someone could have been seriously hurt trying to get out of the bus the wrong way. You all did exactly what you needed to do. I just helped coordinate it." "No, ma'am, it was more than that. You took command of a dangerous situation and turned it into something manageable. That's leadership." "Thank you, Jake. How is everyone else doing?" "I've talked to most of the others. Martha's arm is fine, just bruised, not sprained like we thought. Mr. Patterson is home and feeling good. Even Mrs. Rodriguez called me from the hospital. She wanted me to tell you how grateful she is." After hanging up, Elissa made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the quiet evening traffic on Main Street. A few blocks away, the bus depot would be preparing for tomorrow's routes. Her replacement bus was probably already fueled and ready for the morning run. She thought about Susan Palmer's offer to work with the Emergency Management Office. The idea had merit. She could probably help develop better training programs, improve communication protocols, maybe prevent future emergencies from becoming disasters. But she also thought about her passengers, the regular riders who depended on her for more than just transportation. Mrs. Patterson would be back from the hospital tomorrow, probably worried about missing her dialysis appointment. Jake would return to work, but he might be nervous about riding the bus again. New passengers would hear about the accident and wonder if public transportation was safe. They would need to see a familiar face, someone who demonstrated that life goes on, that temporary setbacks don't define permanent reality. The next morning, Elissa arrived at the depot 30 minutes early, as always. The replacement bus was a newer model, with additional safety features and better communication equipment. The route would be slightly modified to avoid the section of highway where road repairs were still ongoing. Her first passenger was Jake Morrison, carrying his hard hat and lunch pail exactly as he had the day before. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson. Good to see you back." "Good morning, Jake. How are you feeling?" "Little sore, but okay. You?" "Ready for a nice, quiet, boring ride to work." He laughed. "That sounds perfect." One by one, the regular passengers boarded. Martha Chen, her left arm in a professional sling, but otherwise fine. Sarah Williams, who had brought her mother along for moral support. Mr. Patterson, back from his overnight hospital stay with a small bandage on his forehead and strict instructions to take it easy. "How was the hospital?" Elissa asked him. "Terrible food, but the nurses were nice. They said I had the constitution of a man 20 years younger." Korean War veterans are tough. So are air traffic controllers, apparently. As they pulled away from the downtown stop, Elissa noticed a new passenger near the back, a middle-aged woman she didn't recognize, wearing a Riverside County emergency management jacket. At the next stop, the woman approached the front of the bus. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Susan Palmer. We spoke yesterday about emergency management training." "I remember. What brings you on the bus this morning?" "I wanted to see how you interact with your passengers, observe your normal routine. I'm still hoping you'll consider working with us on developing better emergency protocols." "Still thinking about it. Take your time. But I will say this. What you did yesterday wasn't just good emergency response. It was exceptional emergency response. The kind that saves lives and prevents disasters." Palmer rode the bus for the entire route, observing quietly as Elissa managed traffic patterns, communicated with dispatch, and maintained awareness of her passengers' needs and conditions. She saw how naturally leadership emerged from competence, how trust was built through consistency, how crisis management skills transferred seamlessly from air traffic control to public transportation. When they reached the final stop at Riverside Industrial Park, Palmer approached Elissa one more time. "I have a proposal. What if we started small? One Saturday morning workshop for transit drivers, just to share what you learned yesterday. See how it goes, see if you enjoy the teaching aspect." Elissa considered the offer while helping an elderly passenger down the steps. "One workshop?" "One workshop. If you hate it, you never have to do it again. If you find it rewarding, maybe we explore other opportunities." "What would I teach?" "Exactly what you did yesterday. How to stay calm under pressure. How to organize people during an emergency. How to make good decisions when there's no time to think. How to take care of people when help isn't coming immediately." As Elissa drove the empty bus back to the depot, she found herself thinking about Palmer's proposal. Teaching had never been on her radar, but then again, neither had becoming a bus driver after 3 decades in air traffic control. Life had a way of presenting unexpected opportunities. That weekend, Elissa found herself standing in front of a classroom at the County Emergency Services Training Center, facing 24 transit drivers, emergency medical technicians, and volunteer firefighters. "3 days ago, I was just driving my regular route," she began. "I wasn't expecting to manage an emergency evacuation. But when it happened, I discovered that everything I had learned in 32 years of air traffic control was directly applicable to a completely different kind of crisis. She told them about the explosion, the overturned bus, the injured passengers. But more importantly, she talked about the principles behind emergency response: staying calm, delegating responsibility, maintaining communication, focusing on immediate priorities while keeping track of bigger picture concerns. The specific situation will always be different, she explained, but the fundamental approach remains the same. Assess the situation, secure the area, account for all personnel, establish communication, delegate responsibilities, monitor changing conditions, take care of your people. The workshop was scheduled for 2 hours. It ran for 4, with participants asking questions, sharing their own experiences, and working through hypothetical scenarios. This should be mandatory training for all first responders, commented Linda Harrison, a paramedic with 15 years of experience. I've been to dozens of training sessions, but this is the first one that really explains the thinking process behind good emergency management. One of the transit drivers, a man named Carlos Rodriguez, who had been driving buses for 12 years, raised his hand. Mrs. Thompson, I've been in a couple of minor accidents, and both times I felt like I was just reacting to whatever happened next. You're talking about a whole different approach, thinking ahead, having a plan. That's exactly right, Carlos. In air traffic control, we call it staying ahead of the airplane. You can't just respond to what's happening now. You have to anticipate what's going to happen next and be ready for it. Can you give us a practical example? Elissa thought for a moment. Let's say you're driving your route and you see smoke ahead. What's your first instinct? Call dispatch and ask what to do. That's not wrong, but what could you be doing while you're waiting for dispatch to respond? Carlos considered this. Well, I guess I could start looking for alternate routes or safe places to stop if I need to. Exactly. And what else? Maybe prepare my passengers? Let them know we might need to change routes or stop? Good. You're thinking systematically instead of just waiting to be told what to do. That's the difference between managing an emergency and just surviving one. At the end of the session, Susan Palmer pulled Elissa aside. That was outstanding. I've already had 3 requests for follow-up workshops, and 2 other counties want to know if you'd be willing to present to their emergency services personnel. Really? Really? You have a gift for teaching, and more importantly, you have real experience to draw from. That combination is rare. Elissa looked around the classroom at the participants, who were still engaged in small group discussions about emergency scenarios and response strategies. I suppose I could do a few more workshops, as long as it doesn't interfere with my bus route. What if we could arrange your schedule so you drove the morning route, then had afternoons available for training sessions? Same pay, just a different allocation of time. It was an appealing offer. She would still maintain her connection to her regular passengers, but she would also have the opportunity to share knowledge and experience that could potentially save lives in future emergencies. Let me think about it. But she was already thinking about lesson plans, training scenarios, ways to help other people develop the calm confidence that came from proper preparation and systematic thinking. Over the following weeks, word about Elissa's emergency response workshop spread through the regional emergency services community. Fire chiefs began requesting training for their volunteer departments. School superintendents wanted workshops for bus drivers and staff. Even private companies started inquiring about emergency preparedness training for their employees. The response has been incredible, Palmer told Elissa during one of their planning meetings. I think you've identified something that's been missing from traditional emergency training. What's that? Most training focuses on procedures and equipment. Yours focuses on thinking, how to process information under stress, how to make decisions when you don't have complete information, how to maintain leadership when everyone around you is scared. Elissa nodded. In air traffic control, we used to say that the equipment can fail, the procedures can be inadequate, but if you can think clearly under pressure, you can adapt to almost any situation. Exactly. And that's what you're teaching people. Not just what to do, but how to think about what to do. The success of the training program led to an unexpected opportunity. The State Transportation Authority contacted Palmer about developing a statewide curriculum based on Elissa's approach. They want to make it mandatory training for all transit operators, Palmer explained. Not just bus drivers, but anyone responsible for public transportation safety. That's a big responsibility. It is. But think about the impact you could have. Every year, thousands of people rely on public transportation during emergencies, evacuations, natural disasters, infrastructure failures. If their drivers are better prepared to handle crisis situations, you could literally save hundreds of lives. Elissa found herself once again facing an unexpected career transition. 6 months earlier, she had been a retired air traffic controller enjoying the simple routine of driving a bus route. Now she was being asked to develop training programs that could affect emergency response across an entire state. "I need to be honest with you," she told Palmer. "I never thought of myself as a teacher or trainer. This all started because I happened to be in the right place at the wrong time." But that's exactly what makes you effective. You're not teaching theory. You're sharing practical experience. People trust you because you've actually done what you're asking them to do. That weekend, Elissa visited the site where the bus accident had occurred. The highway had been completely repaired with new guardrails and improved signage. The chemical plant was back in operation, with enhanced safety systems and better emergency protocols. Standing at the spot where the bus had overturned, she could remember every detail of that day. The sound of the explosion, the sensation of the world turning sideways, the faces of her passengers as they worked together to ensure everyone's safety. But what struck her most was how ordinary it had all seemed at the time. She hadn't felt heroic or extraordinary. She had simply done what needed to be done, using skills and experience she had developed over decades of public service. Maybe that was the real lesson, that heroism wasn't about dramatic gestures or special abilities. It was about being prepared, staying calm, and taking care of the people who depended on you. 6 months later, the Thompson method of emergency response training was being implemented across the state. Master instructors in 12 counties were delivering workshops to hundreds of public safety personnel, transportation workers, and community volunteers. The approach was spreading beyond emergency response agencies. Businesses were requesting workshops for their management teams. Schools were incorporating the principles into their teacher training programs. Even family service organizations were adapting the methods for use in domestic crisis situations. But every morning, Elissa still drove Route 12 for Millfield County Transit Authority. Same passengers, same route, same commitment to safe, reliable public transportation. The difference was that now she understood her role differently. She wasn't just a bus driver who occasionally taught emergency response workshops. She was an educator who happened to drive a bus, someone whose primary mission was helping people develop the skills and confidence they needed to handle unexpected challenges effectively. One morning, almost 2 years after the accident, a new passenger boarded the bus. A woman in her 30s wearing a jacket that identified her as a safety coordinator for the State Department of Transportation. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Jennifer Walsh. I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Good morning. What brings you to Millfield?" "I'm here to observe your regular bus operations as part of our statewide assessment of the training program. We want to document how your emergency response principles apply to day-to-day transportation safety." As they drove the familiar route, Walsh took notes on how Elissa managed traffic situations, communicated with passengers, and maintained awareness of potential safety issues. "I notice you're constantly scanning the environment," Walsh observed, "looking for potential problems before they develop. Old habit from air traffic control. You learn to see patterns and anticipate problems rather than just reacting to them. That's exactly what we're trying to teach in the advanced workshops. Situational awareness as a foundation for effective response. It's really the most important skill. If you can see problems developing, you have time to prevent them or prepare for them. If you're just reacting to crises after they happen, you're always behind." At the industrial park stop, Walsh introduced herself to several regular passengers, asking about their experiences and perceptions of safety on public transportation. "Mrs. Thompson makes us feel secure," explained Martha Chen. "Not just because of what happened during the accident, but because of how she handles everyday situations. She's always aware of what's happening, always prepared." Has her training program influenced how you think about emergency situations in other parts of your life? Absolutely. I work in quality control at the electronics plant, and I've started applying her principles to workplace safety issues. The same systematic thinking that works for bus emergencies works for preventing industrial accidents. That afternoon, Walsh joined Elissa's workshop for hospital staff members, observing how the principles were adapted for medical emergency situations. "The framework is the same," Elissa explained to the participants, "but the specific applications change depending on your environment and responsibilities. In a hospital, your priorities during a power outage will be different from a bus driver's priorities during a vehicle breakdown, but the thought process is identical." She walked them through a scenario. A major storm had knocked out power to the hospital, backup generators were failing, and they had patients on life support who needed to be evacuated to other facilities. "What's your first step?" she asked the group. "Call administration," suggested one nurse. "That's important, but what can you do while you're waiting for administration to respond?" "Start assessing which patients are most critical and would need to be moved first," said another participant. "Good. What else?" "Check what portable equipment we have available. See which transport vehicles are on site. Start notifying families and other hospitals about the situation." Excellent. You're thinking systematically, gathering information, assessing resources, preparing for multiple contingencies. That's exactly the mindset that prevents emergencies from becoming disasters. After the workshop, Walsh shared her observations with Elissa. "What strikes me most is how you've managed to scale individual wisdom into institutional knowledge. You're not just teaching people what to do, you're teaching them how to think." That was always the goal. Specific procedures are useful, but they can't cover every possible situation. If people understand the principles behind good emergency response, they can adapt to whatever circumstances they encounter. The State Emergency Management Agency wants to nominate your program for a National Safety Award. Would you be comfortable with that kind of recognition? Elissa paused to consider the question. National recognition would bring attention to the program, potentially leading to adoption in other states. But it would also mean more travel, more publicity, more time away from the community work that had inspired the program in the first place. What would that involve? Presenting at a national conference, probably some media interviews, documentation of your methods for broader distribution. Let me think about it. That evening, Elissa sat in her small apartment, looking through folders full of feedback from workshop participants. Letters from emergency responders who had successfully managed crisis situations using her methods. Reports from agencies that had seen measurable improvements in their emergency response capabilities. Photos from training sessions showing engaged, confident participants learning to trust their ability to stay calm under pressure. The work had grown far beyond what she had imagined when Susan Palmer first suggested a single Saturday morning workshop. But at its core, it remained exactly what it had always been. One person sharing practical wisdom with others who might someday need it. Her phone rang. It was Sarah Williams, now a junior studying elementary education and working part-time as a teaching assistant. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to tell you something. Today, we had a minor emergency at the school. A child had an allergic reaction during lunch. I was the first adult on the scene, and I realized I was using everything you taught us that day in the bus." "What did you do?" "I stayed calm, assessed the situation, called for medical help, kept the other children from panicking, and monitored the affected child until the nurse arrived. Afterward, the principal said I handled it exactly right." "You did handle it exactly right. But the point is, I knew what to do because I understood the principles, not because I had been trained for that specific situation." The allergic reaction was completely different from a bus accident, but the thinking process was the same. After hanging up, Elissa realized that Sarah had articulated something important about the program's real value. It wasn't about preparing people for specific types of emergencies. It was about giving them confidence in their ability to think clearly and act effectively when familiar situations suddenly became unfamiliar. The next morning, she called Jennifer Walsh. "I've decided to accept the National Award nomination, but I want to use the platform to emphasize something specific." "What's that?" "That emergency response isn't really about emergencies. It's about developing the mental habits and systematic thinking that serve you well in any challenging situation. The bus accident taught me that the same skills that make you a good air traffic controller can make you a good emergency coordinator, a good teacher, a good community leader." That's a powerful message, and it's a hopeful message. It says that ordinary people already have most of what they need to handle extraordinary situations. They just need to understand how to organize their thinking and trust their instincts. 3 months later, Elissa stood on a stage in front of 800 emergency management professionals from across the country, delivering the keynote address at the National Conference on Crisis Response and Community Resilience. 2.5 years ago, I was a retired air traffic controller driving a bus route in rural Pennsylvania, she began. I had no intention of becoming an emergency response instructor, no plans to develop training programs, and certainly no expectation of standing on this stage today. She told the story of the accident, but focused on what happened after the immediate crisis was resolved. How the experience had revealed the transferable nature of systematic thinking, the importance of calm leadership during uncertainty, and the potential for ordinary citizens to become effective first responders when properly supported. The most important lesson isn't about emergency response techniques, she concluded. It's about human potential, about the capacity for everyday people to rise to meet unexpected challenges when they have clear direction, proper preparation, and confidence in their ability to think clearly under pressure. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Conference organizers received requests from agencies in 43 states wanting information about implementing similar training programs. Publishers inquired about turning her methods into a textbook. Emergency management schools asked about developing degree programs based on her approach. But 6 weeks later, Elissa was back on Route 12, driving her regular passengers to their jobs and appointments, maintaining the connections that had inspired her unexpected second career. "How was your trip to the big city?" asked Mr. Patterson, settling into his usual seat. "Educational, but I'm glad to be home." "Did you tell them about us? About what happened here?" "I did, and I told them that the real heroes weren't the people who responded to the emergency. They were the people who made it possible for the responders to be effective. The passengers who stayed calm and followed instructions, who helped each other, who trusted that we could solve the problem together. As the bus pulled away from downtown Millfield, Elissa reflected on how much her understanding of heroism had evolved since the accident. She had once thought of heroes as people who performed dramatic acts of courage during extraordinary circumstances. Now she understood that real heroism was usually quieter, the daily choice to show up prepared, to stay calm under pressure, to help others when help was needed, and to trust in the collective wisdom and capability of ordinary people working together toward common goals. The bus accident had revealed something important about crisis management, but it had revealed something even more important about human nature. When people felt secure in their leadership, clear about their roles, and confident in their collective ability to solve problems, they could accomplish remarkable things. That insight applied far beyond emergency response. It was relevant to teaching, parenting, management, community organization, and any other situation where people needed to work together effectively under challenging circumstances. As they reached the industrial park, Elissa realized that her journey from air traffic controller to bus driver to emergency response instructor had really been a journey toward understanding a fundamental truth about leadership: that the best leaders don't create followers, they create other leaders. Every passenger who had remained calm during the evacuation, every workshop participant who had gained confidence in their ability to handle crisis situations, every student who had learned to think systematically under pressure, they were all potential leaders, capable of guiding others through their own unexpected challenges. The accident had been a tragedy that became a triumph, a moment of crisis that revealed possibilities no one had imagined. But perhaps most importantly, it had been a reminder that heroism isn't about being extraordinary. It's about bringing extraordinary commitment and care to ordinary responsibilities. 2 years after the national conference, Elissa's influence had spread far beyond emergency response training. Universities were studying her methods as examples of effective adult education. Corporate training companies had adapted her principles for leadership development programs. International aid organizations were using modified versions of her approach to train disaster response volunteers in developing countries. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Federal Aviation Administration announced that they were incorporating elements of the Thompson method into air traffic controller training programs nationwide. "It's come full circle," explained FAA Administrator Rebecca Martinez during a ceremony at O'Hare Airport, where Elissa had spent most of her career. The systematic thinking and crisis management principles that Mrs. Thompson learned during her decades in air traffic control have now been refined and improved through her work in emergency response training. We're bringing those enhanced methods back to help train the next generation of controllers. Standing in the control tower, where she had worked for 32 years, Elissa looked out at the familiar sight of aircraft arriving and departing in carefully orchestrated patterns. The technology had improved since her retirement, but the fundamental challenge remained the same: safely managing complex systems under pressure, coordinating multiple variables, making split-second decisions that affected hundreds of lives. "Mrs. Thompson," said one of the current controllers, a young woman named Angela Rodriguez, "I've been studying your training materials as part of our advanced certification program. The way you break down decision-making under pressure, it's completely changed how I think about handling emergency situations." "What specifically has been helpful?" "The emphasis on systematic thinking even when you're scared. Before, I thought staying calm meant not being afraid. Now I understand that you can be afraid and still make good decisions if you have a framework to follow." That insight perfectly captured what Elissa had learned from her own journey. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to function effectively despite fear. And that ability could be taught, practiced, and improved over time. The ceremony at O'Hare was followed by a reception attended by current and former air traffic controllers, emergency response professionals, and some of Elissa's original bus passengers. Jake Morrison, now a supervisor at the automotive parts plant, had taken the day off to attend. "Mrs. Thompson, I keep thinking about something you said during one of your early workshops," he told her. "You said that emergency response isn't really about responding to emergencies. It's about developing the habits of mind that serve you well in any challenging situation." "I remember that." "Well, I've been using those same principles in my job as a supervisor. When we have production problems or equipment failures, I apply the same systematic approach you taught us. Stay calm, assess the situation, delegate responsibilities, maintain communication. It works just as well for manufacturing crises as it does for bus accidents." This was exactly the kind of feedback that validated Elissa's belief that the principles she taught were fundamentally about effective thinking under pressure, regardless of the specific context. As the reception wound down, Elissa found herself in conversation with Dr. Patricia Wong, a researcher from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, who had been studying the effectiveness of various emergency training programs. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to share some data with you. We've been tracking outcomes for agencies that have implemented your training methods compared to those using traditional emergency response curricula. What have you found?" "Statistically significant improvements across multiple measures, faster response times, better coordination between agencies, fewer injuries during emergency situations, and higher confidence levels among personnel. But the most interesting finding is something we didn't expect." "What's that?" "The agencies using your methods report better performance even during routine, non-emergency operations. It's as if training people to think systematically under pressure improves their overall job performance." This made perfect sense to Elissa. The habits of mind that served people well during crises, careful observation, systematic analysis, clear communication, calm decision-making, were exactly the same habits that contributed to excellence in any demanding profession. "That's actually not surprising," she told Dr. Wong. "In air traffic control, we always said that the controllers who handled routine traffic most efficiently were also the ones who performed best during emergencies. The skills are interconnected." 6 months later, Elissa received an invitation that represented the culmination of her unexpected career in emergency training. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction asked her to develop training materials for international disaster response teams. "The principles you've developed are particularly relevant for humanitarian emergencies," explained UN Coordinator Dr. Michael Okafor during a video conference. When disaster strikes in remote areas with limited infrastructure, the ability to organize effective responses using local resources and personnel becomes critical. The invitation would involve traveling to multiple countries, working with diverse teams of emergency responders, and adapting her methods for use in radically different cultural and operational contexts. It was an extraordinary opportunity, but it would also require significant time away from Millfield and the community that had supported her throughout this journey. "I'm honored by the invitation," she told Dr. Okafor, "but I need to think carefully about how to balance international work with my local commitments." "Of course. Perhaps we could start with a pilot program, develop the training materials here in the U.S., then test them with a few selected international teams. If it works well, we could explore broader implementation." That evening, Elissa sat in her small apartment overlooking Main Street, considering this latest opportunity. Through her window, she could see the bus depot where she still worked 3 mornings a week, maintaining her connection to the passengers and community that had inspired everything that followed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Williams, now a certified teacher working at Millfield Elementary School. "Mrs. Thompson, used your principles during a fire drill today. Kids stayed calm and organized. Drill coordinator said it was the best evacuation she'd ever seen. Thank you for teaching us that leadership is about helping others think clearly. Reading that message, Elissa realized that her decision about the UN opportunity was already made. Her impact wasn't ultimately measured by how many countries adopted her training methods or how many awards she received. It was measured by moments like Sarah's fire drill. Ordinary people applying systematic thinking to keep others safe, one situation at a time. She could contribute to international disaster response without abandoning her local community. She could develop training materials for the UN while still driving her bus route 3 mornings a week. She could continue growing her influence while staying grounded in the relationships and experiences that had taught her everything she knew about effective leadership. The next morning, as Elissa drove Route 12 through the familiar landscape of Millfield County, she thought about how perfectly her current life balanced the local and the global, the routine and the extraordinary, the individual and the institutional. Her passengers that morning included several people who had been on the bus during the accident 3 years earlier. They had all been changed by that experience, but in quiet, everyday ways that spoke to the real nature of heroism and leadership. Martha Chen had become a volunteer emergency responder with the County Rescue Squad, using her experience to help train other civilians in basic crisis management. Mr. Patterson, despite his age, had started teaching Korean War history at the high school, emphasizing the importance of ordinary people rising to meet extraordinary challenges. Bill Foster, the retired Army medic who had helped care for Mrs. Rodriguez, had become one of Elissa's most effective training assistants, bringing medical expertise to complement her systematic approach to emergency coordination. And Mrs. Rodriguez herself, fully recovered from her concussion, had returned to her job at the industrial park with a new appreciation for the importance of workplace safety training. She had convinced her employer to implement Elissa's methods as part of their standard emergency preparedness protocols. Mrs. Thompson, she said as she boarded the bus that morning, I wanted you to know that our plant just completed its annual emergency drill, and for the first time in anyone's memory, we had 0 injuries and completed the evacuation ahead of schedule. That's wonderful to hear, Maria. The safety coordinator said our workers were the most organized and calm he'd ever seen during a drill. He wants to know if you'd be willing to do a training session for our management team. As the bus reached the industrial park, Elissa realized that the real measure of her success wasn't the number of programs implemented or awards received. It was the quiet multiplication of competence and confidence, one person learning to think systematically under pressure, then teaching others, who taught still others, creating an expanding network of people prepared to respond effectively to whatever challenges they might face. Later that afternoon, Elissa attended a regional conference of emergency management coordinators where she was asked to give an impromptu presentation about lessons learned from implementing her training methods across multiple states. The most surprising discovery, she told the audience, has been how universal these principles are. Whether you're coordinating disaster relief in rural communities or managing complex urban emergencies, the fundamental approach remains the same. Stay calm, gather information, prioritize actions, communicate clearly, and trust in people's ability to rise to meet challenges when they have proper guidance. During the question and answer session, a coordinator from Nevada asked, Mrs. Thompson, how do you maintain quality control when your methods are being adapted for such diverse contexts and cultures? That's an excellent question, and it touches on something I've learned about the difference between procedures and principles. Specific procedures need to be adapted for local conditions, languages, and cultural norms, but the underlying principles, systematic thinking, calm leadership, clear communication, Those translate across virtually any context. Can you give us an example? Certainly. We recently worked with a tribal emergency response team in Montana. Their traditional decision-making process involves consulting with elders and reaching consensus through discussion. That's very different from the command and control structure used by most emergency agencies. But when we adapted our training to respect their cultural approach while incorporating our systematic thinking methods, the results were outstanding. They maintained their cultural integrity while significantly improving their emergency response effectiveness. A coordinator from Florida raised her hand. What about situations where you're working with volunteers who have no formal emergency training? Some of our best results have actually come from volunteer organizations. They often have something that professional responders sometimes lack: a deep emotional investment in their community's well-being. When you combine that motivation with systematic training in crisis thinking, you get remarkably effective results. After the conference, Elissa drove back to Millfield thinking about how her understanding of emergency response had evolved. What had started as a personal experience of managing one bus accident had grown into a comprehensive approach to building community resilience. The key insight wasn't about specific emergency procedures. It was about developing collective capacity for effective thinking under pressure. When communities had networks of people trained in systematic crisis response, they became inherently more resilient to all kinds of unexpected challenges. That evening, she received a call from Dr. Okafor at the United Nations. "Mrs. Thompson, I have some news about the international pilot program. We've received funding approval and we're ready to begin developing training materials. But I also have a request." "What kind of request?" "We'd like you to consider serving as the lead consultant for a new initiative, the Global Community Resilience Project. It would involve training master instructors in multiple countries, developing culturally adapted curricula, and establishing networks of local emergency response capabilities." It was a massive undertaking that would represent the ultimate scaling of everything she had learned from one bus accident in rural Pennsylvania. That sounds like it would require significant travel and time commitments. It would, but we've designed it to be implemented in phases over several years. You could maintain your local responsibilities while gradually expanding your international involvement. Elissa thought about the proposal. It would mean reaching thousands of people across multiple continents, potentially preventing disasters and saving lives on a scale she had never imagined possible. But it would also mean staying true to the principles she had learned from her own community, that effective leadership grows from genuine relationships, that the best training emerges from real experience, and that sustainable change happens one person, one community, one relationship at a time. "Dr. Okafor, I'm interested in the project, but I have conditions." "Of course. What would you need?" "First, I want to continue driving my bus route in Millfield. That's where I learned everything I know about this work, and I need to stay connected to that reality." "Understood." "Second, I want the international training to be developed in partnership with local community leaders, not imposed from outside. Each region needs to adapt the methods to their own cultural context." "Second, I want the international training to be developed in partnership with local community leaders, not imposed from outside. Each region needs to adapt the methods to their own cultural context." That aligns perfectly with our approach. "And third, I want to ensure that any master instructors we train remain connected to their home communities. The goal isn't to create a cadre of professional trainers, it's to build local capacity for community resilience." 6 months later, Elissa found herself in a small village in Bangladesh, working with local emergency coordinators to adapt her training methods for communities that faced annual flooding, cyclones, and other natural disasters. Mrs. Thompson, said Rashida Begum, a community health worker who had become one of the most effective local trainers. Your methods work very well here, but we have made some changes. What kind of changes? In our culture, when there is an emergency, the women organize the evacuation of children and elderly, while the men deal with property and livestock. Your training helps both groups work more systematically, but we needed to adapt it to our traditional roles. That sounds like exactly the kind of adaptation that makes the training more effective. Yes, but there is something else. We have started using your principles for non-emergency situations too. When there are disputes between families, or problems with water access, or issues with crop management, the same thinking that helps during floods also helps with everyday community challenges. This was precisely the kind of insight that Elissa had hoped for, but hadn't expected to see so quickly. The systematic thinking approach she taught wasn't just about emergency response. It was about building general capacity for collective problem solving. Over the following year, she worked with communities in 6 countries, each adapting her methods to their unique circumstances while maintaining the core principles of calm leadership, systematic thinking, and community-based response. In Kenya, pastoralist communities used the training to improve their responses to drought and livestock disease. In Peru, mountain villages adapted the methods for earthquake and landslide preparedness. In the Philippines, coastal communities applied the principles to typhoon evacuation and recovery. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. A letter from Jake Morrison, delivered to her while she was conducting training in rural Guatemala. Mrs. Thompson, he wrote, I wanted you to know that our plant implemented a new safety protocol based on your training methods, and it prevented what could have been a serious accident last week. When a chemical leak occurred in one of our processing areas, our emergency response team followed exactly the systematic approach you taught us 3 years ago. Everyone stayed calm. We evacuated the area efficiently, contained the leak, and had the situation under control before the fire department even arrived. The plant manager said it was the most professional emergency response he'd ever seen from our team. But more importantly, no one was hurt, and we were back in operation within hours instead of days. I thought you should know that what you taught us on that day when our bus overturned is still saving lives and protecting people. Thank you for showing us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they know how to think clearly under pressure. Reading that letter in a small village 3,000 miles from Millfield, Elissa realized that she had achieved something she had never set out to accomplish, creating a self-sustaining network of people committed to helping others develop confidence and competence in the face of unexpected challenges. The accident that had changed her life had been, in many ways, unremarkable. No dramatic rescue, no life or death decisions, just a group of ordinary people working together to solve a problem that none of them had expected to face. But from that unremarkable incident had grown something remarkable. A new understanding of how individual wisdom could become collective strength, how systematic thinking could be taught and shared, and how the difference between disaster and triumph often came down to simple principles that anyone could learn. As Elissa prepared to return to Millfield after her month-long international training assignment, she thought about the full circle her life had taken. From air traffic controller to bus driver to emergency response instructor to international consultant, each role had built on the previous one. Each had taught her something new about leadership and human potential. But at the core of everything was the same fundamental insight she had gained during those critical hours after the bus accident. That heroism isn't about extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. It's about ordinary people developing the skills, habits, and confidence they need to rise to whatever challenges life presents. And sometimes that's all the heroism the world needs. The plane carrying Elissa back to Pennsylvania descended through clouds toward the familiar landscape of her home state. Through the window, she could see the highways and fields, the small towns and industrial areas that had shaped her understanding of community and resilience. In her carry-on bag were training materials translated into 4 languages, photos from workshops conducted in remote villages, and contact information for dozens of new master instructors who would continue the work of building community emergency response capacity around the world. But she was most looking forward to tomorrow morning, when she would once again climb behind the wheel of Route 12 and greet the passengers who had taught her everything she knew about the power of ordinary people working together in extraordinary circumstances. The bus would be waiting for her at the depot, fueled and ready, just as it had been every morning for the past 5 years. The route would be the same: past Miller's farm, through downtown Millfield, onto the industrial park where people went to work each day, building lives and communities one ordinary moment at a time. And if another emergency ever occurred, whether on her bus route or anywhere else in the world, there would be a little more knowledge, a little more preparation, a little more confidence available to help people think clearly, act systematically, and take care of each other when it mattered most. That was her legacy. Not a program or a method, but a network of people who understood that they were capable of more than they had ever imagined, and who were prepared to help others discover the same truth about themselves. The plane touched down smoothly, and Elissa Thompson was home. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.